It was a peaceful morning in the quiet neighborhood where Officer Jake Moore lived with his wife, Emily. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the streets. Birds chirped in the trees, and the cool breeze swayed the leaves gently. Emily loved mornings like this, calm, simple, and full of peace. But today, something felt different. Emily had decided to take a walk through the park near her home. She enjoyed these walks, especially when Jake was out on his shift. They gave her a chance to clear her mind and enjoy the beauty around her. She put on her comfortable shoes, grabbed a bottle of water, and stepped outside. As she entered the park, she noticed the usual sights: children playing on the swings, joggers running by, and people walking their dogs. But there was something else, something that caught her attention. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, was standing by the playground, staring at her. At first, Emily thought nothing of it. Maybe the girl was just playing or waiting for someone. But when Emily walked past, the girl's gaze followed her, not just with a casual glance, but with an intensity that made Emily pause for a second. She wasn't sure why, but it felt odd. Emily continued walking, trying to brush off the feeling. But when she glanced over her shoulder a few minutes later, the little girl was still there, standing in the same spot. And to Emily's surprise, the girl began to follow her. Okay, this is strange, Emily thought, feeling a small knot of discomfort in her stomach. The girl wasn't running or playing like the other kids. She was walking at a steady pace, keeping a safe distance, but never letting Emily out of her sight. Emily quickened her pace, trying to get away from the odd feeling. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but something about the little girl made her uneasy. It wasn't just the fact that she was following her. It was the way the girl's eyes never left her. There was something almost searching about the way she watched Emily, as if she were studying her every move. The path around the park was a long, winding one, and Emily decided to take the route that led by the lake. The quiet, peaceful sound of water gently lapping against the shore usually helped her relax, but today it did little to calm her nerves. She glanced over her shoulder once again. The little girl was still following, her small footsteps echoing in the quiet morning. Emily's mind raced. Was the girl lost? Did she need help? But why hadn't she approached Emily? Why just follow from a distance? The longer Emily walked, the more unsettled she felt. The park was supposed to be a place of safety and serenity, but with each step, it seemed like something was wrong. Trying to ignore her growing anxiety, Emily decided to sit on a bench near the water. She hoped the girl would either stop following or go back to playing with the other children. But to Emily's surprise, the girl didn't stop. Instead, she slowly walked toward the bench, her eyes locked on Emily as if she was meant to be there, like she had been waiting for Emily all along. Emily stood up, her heart beginning to race. Maybe I should just ask her if she needs help, she thought. But as she took a step toward the girl, she noticed something strange. The little girl's face remained calm, almost too calm for someone her age. She didn't seem scared, lost, or in need of help. In fact, she seemed to be waiting for something, or someone. Emily stopped in her tracks, staring at the girl, trying to make sense of the situation. There was no denying it now. This wasn't a simple case of a child following another adult. There was something more to it. And that's when Emily felt it. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that the girl wasn't just following her. She was watching her. Emily stood frozen, her eyes locked with the little girl's. The park around them seemed quieter now, the usual sounds of children playing and birds singing fading into the background. All she could hear was the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft crunch of the gravel beneath her feet. The little girl hadn't moved an inch, but there was something in her gaze that made Emily feel as though she was being watched, an intensity in the way the girl's eyes fixed on her, unwavering and almost calculating. Why is she looking at me like that? Emily thought, her heart beginning to pound in her chest. The unsettling feeling grew stronger, like something was wrong, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. With a deep breath, Emily tried to shake off the anxiety creeping up on her. Maybe it was all in her head. After all, the girl was just a child. What harm could she possibly pose? Yet there was a sense of urgency in the girl's actions, something Emily couldn't ignore. She began walking again, her steps quicker now, hoping that by putting distance between herself and the little girl, the strange sensation would fade. But as Emily turned onto a new path, she caught a glimpse of the girl, still behind her, still following. The little girl had moved without a sound, as though she knew exactly where Emily was going. It was as if she was waiting for Emily to move, as though this whole thing was planned. Emily couldn't explain it, but she could feel her discomfort growing with each step. Okay, this is getting weird, Emily thought, her instincts telling her to stop and turn around. But instead, she kept walking, now at a brisk pace, trying to keep her composure. The park, once a place of peace, felt more like a maze. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but something told her to be careful. As she neared the park exit, Emily decided to stop for a moment. She turned to face the little girl, who had stopped too, maintaining her distance. The girl's face was still unreadable, her small body standing perfectly still. Emily, trying to calm her nerves, spoke first, hoping that the child would answer and put her mind at ease. "Hey there, are you lost? Do you need help?" Emily asked, her voice gentle but firm. The little girl didn't speak. She just stood there, watching Emily with those piercing eyes. It was as if she didn't hear the question at all, or maybe she didn't care to answer. Emily's hand tightened around the strap of her bag, a subtle sign of her growing unease. For a moment, everything felt suspended in time. Emily's heart was racing, and she could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on her. The girl was still staring, almost waiting for something. Waiting for Emily to do something, maybe. Suddenly, Emily heard footsteps approaching from behind. She spun around, startled, and saw a familiar face. Officer Jake Moore. He was dressed in his uniform, his expression concerned as he took in the scene before him. "Emily?" Jake asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. "What's going on?" Emily quickly turned to the little girl, but she was already walking away, heading toward the trees at the far edge of the park. Without a word, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Emily and Jake standing there, both uncertain of what had just happened. Jake looked at his wife, his brow furrowing. "Are you okay? What was that all about?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. "I don't know. She was just following me, staring at me. It was really strange. I thought she was lost, but when I tried to talk to her, she didn't say anything." Jake's eyes narrowed as he scanned the area where the girl had disappeared. "That's odd. Are you sure she's not just a curious child? It could be nothing." "I don't know, Jake," Emily replied, her voice shaky. Something didn't feel right. She was too calm, too focused. Jake looked down the path where the little girl had gone, still unsure of what to make of it. "Maybe it's nothing, but I'll keep an eye out. You're sure you're okay?" Emily nodded, though the feeling of unease hadn't left her. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little shaken. I've never had anything like that happen before." Jake gave her a reassuring smile. "Let's get out of here. Maybe it's best we head home." As they walked toward the exit together, Emily couldn't help but glance over her shoulder one last time. The park seemed as peaceful as ever, the early morning sun now casting a warm glow on everything. But in her heart, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something about that little girl. The way she watched, the way she followed her. It wasn't over yet. Days passed, but the memory of the little girl continued to linger in Emily's mind. No matter how hard she tried to push the thought away, it stayed with her. Every time she walked through the park, she found herself scanning the area, looking for that familiar, watchful face. But the little girl was nowhere to be found. Emily tried to convince herself that it had just been a strange, one-off encounter, a child simply acting curious. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The way the little girl had followed her, the eerie silence, and most of all, the way she had looked at her. It all felt too deliberate, too purposeful. It was late afternoon when Emily was returning from the grocery store. The streets were quiet, and the air was cool. She turned the corner toward her house, her mind still wandering back to the girl in the park. That's when she saw it again, the same little girl. Emily froze in her tracks. She hadn't expected to see her again, especially not so close to home. The girl was standing near the corner of the street, her small frame barely visible as she peeked out from behind a tree. She didn't seem to be doing anything, just watching Emily. It was almost like the girl was waiting for something or someone. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She was no longer in the park, where there were other people around. This was her neighborhood. This was her home. She took a few cautious steps forward, trying to get a better look. The girl was still staring at her, unblinking. Emily felt a sudden rush of panic flood through her chest. Something told her this wasn't just a random encounter anymore. The girl wasn't just curious. She was following her again. But why? "Hey, are you okay?" Emily called out gently, trying to keep her voice steady. She didn't want to startle the girl, but she needed to know what was going on. The little girl didn't respond. She just stood there, her expression still unreadable. Emily took another step toward her heart racing. Was the girl lost again? Had she somehow ended up here without her parents? Before Emily could move any closer, a familiar voice broke the tension. "Emily, there you are." Jake's voice called from down the street. He was jogging toward her, his uniform neatly pressed, but there was a concerned look on his face as he saw the little girl standing just ahead. The girl's gaze shifted briefly to Jake, but then quickly returned to Emily, as if she were waiting for something more. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The way the girl acted, it wasn't just innocent curiosity. There was something behind those eyes, something that Emily couldn't explain. "Emily, what's going on?" Jake asked, coming up beside her. Emily turned to him, her voice trembling slightly. "That's her. The little girl who's been following me. I don't understand why she's here." Jake looked from Emily to the girl, then back again. He stepped forward, trying to approach the child cautiously. "Hey there, little one," he called gently, bending down to the girl's level. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" The girl didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't even flinch. She just stared at Jake, her eyes sharp, like she was measuring him. It was like she was waiting for something to happen. "Okay, this is getting weird," Jake said, standing up straight. "Emily, stay here. I'll go check it out. I'm going to call this in. It's not normal for a child to be hanging around like this without saying a word." Emily nodded, her anxiety rising as she watched Jake walk toward his patrol car. As Jake made the call, Emily kept her eyes on the little girl. She was still standing perfectly still, watching her with that same intense gaze. Every passing second felt like it lasted an eternity. "Don't worry, Emily," Jake said as he returned to her. "We'll figure this out." But Emily couldn't shake the growing feeling that there was something more to this, something deeper. The little girl wasn't just a lost child. She wasn't just following for fun. She had a purpose, and Emily was starting to realize she might be the reason. Just then, a car pulled up to the curb. It was an unmarked vehicle, and out stepped a man in a black suit. Emily didn't recognize him, but the serious expression on his face told her that this was someone important. The man walked straight toward the little girl, who didn't move an inch. The air felt thick, as if everything was about to change. "Is everything all right, officer?" the man asked Jake, his eyes fixed on the girl. Jake looked confused. "I'm not sure yet, sir. We've got a child here who's been following my wife, and she's not speaking or explaining why she's here." The man glanced at Emily, then at the little girl. He seemed to recognize something about her that they didn't. Slowly, he walked up to the girl and bent down, speaking softly. "It's time to go," he said quietly. To Emily's shock, the little girl slowly nodded and turned, walking away without a word, following the man like she had been waiting for his signal. Jake, now visibly unsettled, looked at Emily. Who was that man? And why does the little girl know him? Emily had no answers. She could only watch as the two of them walked away, disappearing into the distance. The next few days were filled with confusion and unanswered questions. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the little girl, the man in the black suit, and the strange way the whole situation had unfolded. Every time she walked past the spot where the girl had been standing, her mind raced. Who was that man? And why had he come for the little girl so suddenly? Emily tried to go about her daily routine, but she felt a growing unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she knew. Jake had tried to reassure her that it was probably just a misunderstanding, but deep down, Emily knew there was something off about the whole situation. Then one evening, as she sat in her living room, the phone rang. Emily answered it quickly, hoping it was Jake letting her know he was on his way home from work. But the voice on the other end wasn't Jake's. It was a voice she didn't recognize. Emily Moore, the voice asked, calm but firm. Yes, this is Emily, she replied, her heart beating faster. There was something about the way the person said her name that made her nervous. My name is Detective Collins, the voice continued. I need you to come down to the station. We need to talk to you about the incident involving the little girl you saw in the park. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The little girl, she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Yes, Collins said, his tone serious. I know this might be unsettling, but it's important you come in. We have questions, and we need your help. Before Emily could respond, the line went dead. She stood there for a moment, holding the phone, the reality of the situation sinking in. What did the police want with her? Was the little girl somehow involved in something more serious? The uncertainty clouded her thoughts. Jake arrived home a few minutes later, and Emily quickly told him about the phone call. His face darkened when he heard the name Detective Collins. I've heard of him, Jake said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. He's a detective with the Special Crimes Unit. Not someone you'd want to mess with. This isn't just a missing child case. Whatever's going on, it's more than that. Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Jake, I'm scared. Why would they want to talk to me? I didn't do anything. Jake gave her a reassuring smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Don't worry, Emily. Just stay calm. We'll go together. If you need me there, I'll be right by your side. After a few moments of silence, Emily nodded. She knew that Jake was trying to keep her calm, but the unease she felt was impossible to ignore. There was something about this whole situation that wasn't adding up, and she had a feeling it wasn't going to end with just a simple conversation at the police station. When they arrived at the police station, Emily was led into a small, dimly lit room. Detective Collins was waiting for them, his serious expression giving nothing away. He stood as they entered, offering a firm handshake. Mrs. Moore, he said, his voice steady but with an underlying tension. Please, take a seat. Emily sat down, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. She could sense that something was about to be revealed, something that would change everything. Let me get straight to the point, Detective Collins began. The little girl you saw in the park, her name is Lily. She's not just any child. She's connected to something far bigger than you might realize. Emily's heart raced. What do you mean? She's just a little girl. Why is she following me? Collins hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Lily is involved in a case we've been investigating for months. She's been used in a very dangerous operation. We've been tracking her movements, but until recently, we didn't know exactly who she was connected to. And then you met her. Emily blinked, struggling to understand. What kind of operation? I don't understand. The detective leaned forward, his voice low. It's a secret program, one that involves children being used in covert operations. We've been trying to locate them for a long time. Lily is one of the last pieces we need to uncover the full story. She's been trained, watched, by people who've been using her as a pawn in something very dangerous. Emily's mind raced. She had no idea what he was talking about. Lily, the sweet little girl who had followed her so quietly, a pawn in a dangerous operation. But why me? Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why was she following me? Lily wasn't just following you, Collins explained. She's been instructed to get close to certain people, people who may be connected to a larger investigation we've been working on. We think you might have unwittingly become involved in this because of your connection to Officer Jake Moore. His position is important to the investigation. Emily sat back in her chair, trying to process everything. Are you saying I'm somehow part of this operation? No, not exactly, Collins said quickly. But you've become part of the puzzle. Lily was watching you, trying to gauge your involvement, trying to figure out if you knew more than you should. Emily shook her head in disbelief. This can't be happening. She's just a little girl. How could she be part of something like that? Detective Collins looked at her with a grave expression. This goes deeper than you realize. We're doing everything we can to protect her and get to the people behind all of this. But for now, I need you to stay out of it. This situation isn't over yet. The room felt heavier now, as though the very air was thick with secrets. Emily's mind struggled to catch up with everything that had been revealed. The world she knew, her peaceful neighborhood, her calm routine, was starting to crumble into something far darker and more dangerous. And she was at the heart of it. Emily's thoughts were interrupted by Detective Collins, who was now standing up. He seemed unusually tense, as though there was something more he wanted to say but was hesitating. Mrs. Moore, he began, looking her square in the eyes, I'm going to be completely honest with you. The situation is far from over. You need to be careful. I don't understand, Emily replied, her voice wavering. You said Lily's involved in some operation, but what does that have to do with me? I'm just a normal person. Collins sighed, rubbing his forehead as if the words he was about to say were difficult. Lily isn't just a child caught up in something bigger. She's connected to a group, an underground network of individuals who've been manipulating children for covert operations. But we believe you're connected to the organization indirectly through your husband, Jake. And that's where things get tricky. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Jake? What does my husband have to do with this? Jake's job, Collins said carefully, in law enforcement. His position gives him access to sensitive information. There's a chance that he's inadvertently been drawn into something dangerous without even knowing it. Your connection to him makes you a target, Emily. And this girl, Lily, is the key. Emily's mind was reeling. Could Jake really be involved in something like this? She couldn't imagine it. He had always been a dedicated officer, a good man. But what if he had unknowingly crossed paths with the wrong people? What if his job had put them all in danger? I don't know what to believe anymore, Emily whispered, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her. If what you're saying is true, then what am I supposed to do? Collins looked at her with a mix of sympathy and urgency. Stay alert. I know this is overwhelming, but the next steps are critical. We're trying to track down the people behind this, but right now, they know we're closing in. They might come after you, Emily. After Jake. I need you to be careful and report anything unusual. We'll have someone keeping an eye on you for your safety. Emily nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. She had to stay strong for Jake, for herself. She had no idea how deep this could go, but now she understood that her life had become intertwined with a world of danger and secrets she never expected. As Emily left the police station, her mind was clouded with questions, but one stood out above the rest. What was Jake's role in all of this? The next morning, as Emily sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, she found herself staring at her phone. She hadn't heard from Jake since last night. She tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Something wasn't right. He was usually home by now. She glanced out the window, noticing a black car parked across the street. The car didn't belong to any of the neighbors, and it seemed to be watching her house. Emily's heart began to race. Her instincts were screaming at her to be cautious, but she didn't know who to trust anymore. Before she could think too much, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from Jake. "I'm at work. Don't worry, Emily. Stay safe. I'll be home soon." Emily stared at the message, confused. The text seemed normal, but the unease in her chest wouldn't subside. The black car, the unsettling feeling, it all seemed connected. Her thoughts were interrupted when there was a knock at the door. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly walked toward the door. Through the peephole, she could see a man standing outside. He was wearing a black suit, the same kind of suit as the man who had been with Lily before. Her breath caught in her throat. Was this another person involved in the operation? She hesitated for a moment, considering her options. She could call the police, but what if this was another warning? The man's presence didn't feel like a coincidence. Emily opened the door just enough to speak through the crack. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man didn't immediately respond. He only stared at her for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "Emily Moore, you don't know who you're dealing with, but you will. Your husband's in danger, and if you don't help us, things will get much worse for you." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though her mind was racing. The man didn't answer right away. He glanced behind him, as if checking for something. "We know about the little girl. We know she's been watching you. It's time for you to make a decision, whether you want to be part of the solution or the problem." Before Emily could respond, the man turned and walked away, disappearing down the street as quickly as he had arrived. Her mind was spinning. What had he meant? What decision was she supposed to make? As she closed the door, Emily realized the gravity of the situation. She wasn't just dealing with a strange child anymore. She was in the midst of something much bigger than she could have imagined. And whatever decision she made next could change everything. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. Emily couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched, that every little detail of her life was being scrutinized. Every time she went to the store, every time she stepped outside, she felt eyes on her. And the black car remained parked across the street. Whoever these people were, they weren't backing off. But it wasn't just the strange man or the car that made her anxious. It was Jake. Since the night at the police station, he'd been distant, as though something was weighing on him. He kept his phone on silent, and when he did answer, his voice was curt, almost as if he were hiding something. Emily didn't know if it was the pressure of his job, or if he knew more than he was letting on about everything that had been happening. Either way, his behavior only deepened her fears. She needed answers. Late one night, as the house settled into an eerie silence, Emily made up her mind. She couldn't keep waiting for Jake to come home and give her the information she needed. She had to take action herself. She picked up her phone, dialing the number for Detective Collins. She had to know what was going on with Jake and what was really happening with Lily. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before Detective Collins answered. "Mrs. Moore," he said, his voice low and serious. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. Is everything okay?" "I don't know," Emily replied, her voice trembling. "Something's happening with Jake. I think he knows more than he's letting on, and I don't know who to trust anymore. What's going on? What's really happening with Lily and the people watching us?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. When Collins spoke again, his voice was guarded. "Emily, I've told you before. There's a lot more to this situation than you realize. Jake might be in more danger than you think. You need to be careful. I'm trying to keep track of things, but I can't give you all the details just yet." Emily's frustration boiled over. "I don't care about details. I need to know if my husband is in danger. I need to know what's really going on with Lily. This has gone too far." "I understand your frustration," Collins said, his voice softening. "But you're not the only one caught in the middle of this. There are people who will stop at nothing to protect their operation. If you want answers, I need you to stay calm and listen to me. Do you understand?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Yes. Tell me what I need to do. Don't trust anyone right now, especially anyone who claims to have answers. They might be trying to use you. Keep your distance from Jake for now. I know this sounds harsh, but I'm not convinced he's fully aware of what's going on. I'll keep you updated as best as I can, but I need you to stay alert. Don't take any risks." Emily's mind spun with confusion. "What do you mean, don't trust Jake?" "Just keep an eye on him, Emily. If anything feels off, call me immediately. And for the love of God, don't confront anyone about this unless you're sure of their intentions." The line went silent, and Emily felt the weight of the detective's words settle heavily on her shoulders. The last thing she wanted was to be separated from Jake, but something was wrong, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. She hung up the phone, her mind racing. Was Jake really involved in this dangerous network? Was he hiding something from her? She didn't know what to believe, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't just sit back and wait for things to get worse. The next day, Emily watched from her window as Jake left for work. He seemed distracted, his brow furrowed in thought as he climbed into his car. Emily hesitated for a moment before grabbing her jacket. She had to follow him. She had to know where he was going and who he was meeting. She waited until Jake's car was out of sight. Then she hurried out the door, trying to keep a safe distance. She followed him through the streets, doing her best to stay hidden, while not drawing attention to herself. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something she wasn't prepared for. Jake eventually stopped at a nondescript building on the outskirts of town, a building Emily had never seen before. It was old, run down, and completely out of place. Jake parked in the lot and entered through the side door without looking back. Emily stood across the street, her heart pounding in her chest. What was he doing here? This was no ordinary office or police station. This place looked abandoned, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to everything that had been happening recently. Her curiosity got the best of her. She crossed the street quickly and ducked behind a nearby dumpster, trying to keep herself out of view. She couldn't get too close. It was too risky, but she needed to see what was going on inside. After a few moments, Emily saw two men in suits walk past the building, their faces obscured by dark sunglasses. They didn't look like ordinary citizens. They looked like they were part of something secretive, and as they walked past, one of them glanced back at the building. The look in his eyes made Emily's blood run cold. The man's eyes locked onto hers for a brief moment. He knew she was there. Her stomach dropped. Without thinking, Emily backed away from the corner and ran back to her car. She had to get out of there before they noticed she had seen too much. As she drove home, Emily's mind raced. Whoever those men were, they were connected to Jake's mysterious meeting, and she had a feeling it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. Emily's heart raced as she pulled into the driveway. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind over and over. The black-suited men, the secret building, the eerie feeling that something bigger was at play. She had no choice but to confront Jake. She had to know what was going on, no matter how dangerous it might be. Her hand shook as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was quiet, but Emily felt a strange tension in the air, as if something was waiting to explode. She glanced around, hoping Jake would walk through the door any second now, but there was no sign of him. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from Detective Collins. "Emily, I don't have much time. There's something you need to know. Jake's been involved in something much bigger than you think. He's not just in danger, he's a target. The people behind this know you're getting close. You need to get out of there. Now." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to think. The detective's warning only confirmed her suspicions, but how could she leave without Jake? How could she run? when she knew so little about what was truly happening. She didn't have much time to think before the front door creaked open. Jake stepped inside, looking tired, his eyes darkened with stress. His appearance only confirmed that something was very wrong. The man she loved, the man she trusted, was caught in a web that neither of them could have predicted. "Emily," Jake said, his voice sounding strained. "We need to talk." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she stood up, facing him. This was the moment. The truth had to come out, no matter how painful it was. "Jake," she whispered, "what's going on? What are you involved in?" Jake's eyes softened for a brief moment, but then they hardened. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to find out like this, but now, I don't have a choice." He looked at her, his face filled with regret. "I've been working undercover for the last year. I've been investigating a criminal network, one that's involved in everything. People like Lily. They use children, Emily. And they use families, like ours, as pawns in their game. They use people who trust them, people like me, to get what they want." Emily's world began to tilt, everything she had thought she knew unraveling before her eyes. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Jake, an undercover agent in a dangerous criminal network. She had no idea that his job was anything more than being a cop. The reality of it all hit her hard, and she struggled to process the weight of his confession. "You're telling me that Lily's connected to this, and that all of this, everything that's happened to us, it's because of this organization?" Emily's voice trembled with disbelief. Jake nodded, looking more exhausted than ever. "Yes, the people behind it. They've been tracking me, trying to manipulate everything I do. And now, they found out about you. They're using you to get to me. They think they can control the situation. But they're wrong. They don't realize that I'm not going to back down. I'm not going to let them use us." Emily's mind was spinning, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was never going to be the same again. This wasn't some petty crime ring or a random mistake. It was a shadow organization that had its hands in every part of their lives. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Before Emily could say anything else, her phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. Without thinking, she answered. "Hello," she said, her voice shaky. There was a long pause on the other end, and then the voice she heard sent chills down her spine. "Emily, we know you're with Jake. We know everything. And if you don't want to see your family suffer, you'll cooperate." Her blood ran cold. It was the same voice she had heard that night when the man knocked on her door. The same person who had warned her. "What do you want?" Emily demanded, trying to steady her breath. "We want Jake," the voice replied. "You'll bring him to us. You'll bring him to the building. Otherwise, the consequences will be severe." The call abruptly ended, leaving Emily standing there in shock. The silence in the room felt suffocating, and she turned to Jake, who looked just as stunned. "They know," she said, her voice a whisper. "They know everything. They're coming for you." Jake's expression shifted, the tension in his jaw tightening. He grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her toward the door. "We don't have much time. We need to leave now." But just as they reached the door, the sound of tires screeching echoed outside. Emily's heart raced as she turned to look out the window. A black SUV had pulled up in front of the house, and two men dressed in suits stepped out. They were the same men Emily had seen earlier. Jake cursed under his breath. "They're here. They're not going to let us go without a fight." With no time to waste, Jake grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her toward the back door. But as they tried to leave, a harsh voice shouted from the front yard. "Don't even think about it, Jake." The voice was deep, commanding. The men in suits had surrounded the house. Emily's stomach dropped. There was no way out. They were trapped. Jake turned to her, his face full of determination. "You need to go. I'll handle this." Emily shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." Before Jake could argue, There was a loud bang from the front door, followed by the sound of footsteps rushing through the house. They were closing in on them. Fast. Jake's eyes locked onto hers. "Emily, listen to me. I love you. I'll find a way to get out of this. But you need to go now, before it's too late." Emily hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. She didn't want to leave him. She didn't want to be separated, not when everything was falling apart. But she knew deep down that he was right. If she didn't leave now, they both might be lost forever. With one last, desperate look, Emily ran out the back door, not knowing what her future held, but knowing that everything had changed in an instant.